Number 10, Spider-Punk. Let's start off with a more obscure alternate, shall we? But one with quite the look. Spikes will never die, nor will the punk aesthetic. The spirit may be something else, but that's a discussion for another day. Spider-Punk is Hobart Brown from Earth 138 and comes to us from the Spiderverse event of 2014. But he appeared in 2015. The Spiderverse was an event where Spider-Man met so many alternate versions of himself because there were spider totems. Being a spider person was now like an assignment from a spider god type thing. They were being hunted down by spider vampires. Mileage varies on the plot itself, but people really like the alternates. And there was pretty much all the kinds that you could conceive. For Hobart, he was a homeless teen bitten by a radioactive spider, well, irradiated in a toxic waste dump. He becomes a punk rock version of Spider-Man, with a guitar, leading the downtrodden people against President Norman Osborn. And he would be recruited to join the army of Spider-Men. For many, they just love the concept of a punk rock Spider-Man. And the images are all very fun. Sneakers, jean vests, head spikes in the form of a mohawk. There's always time for fashion. Number 9, Spider Assassin from Earth 8351. This is an alternate version of Peter Parker. He first appeared in a What If story, What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine #1. In this universe, you had very much the same Peter Parker until he fought Wolverine. Then everything completely diverged and he ended up being trained by him and becoming an assassin. Cold-blooded assassin. No more friendly neighborhood Spider-Man over here. Fans of a darker, harder-edged Peter tend to gravitate towards characters like Spider Assassin. His costume, again, is also cool. And of course has black accents rather than blue because he's edgy. In this universe, he left Mary Jane for a woman named Alex who looked almost exactly like Gwen Stacy and also died. Don't look like Gwen Stacy. He would be recruited into the Spider-Verse event alongside original characters like Spider-Punk. He wouldn't make it though. So much spider carnage in that event. Number 8, Man Spider. One of Spider-Man's consistent fears is being overwhelmed by Spider-Man, and nowhere does this happen more literally than when he starts to mutate into Man Spider. This is because his DNA could be viewed as in flux. Just a little bit of a nudge sends him more down that path to his mutagenic nightmare. That was the name of one of the arcs where this happened. The full-blown Man Spider is credited to the 90s animated series. As before that in comics, he got 6 arms, but it was something that was dealt with pretty quickly, and also that was the same issue where he met Morbius, fun fact. In the comics, the transformation tends to be triggered by meddling, people messing with his DNA, and less so because that's just the way he's going. One big devolution, or evolution, depending upon how you look at it, happened in the Savage Land, because anything can happen in the Savage Land. Rogue can make out with people in the Savage Land. Number 7, Scarlet Spider. Now there have been several characters who have taken on this mantle, but we're gonna look at the first for our purposes, and that's Ben Reilly. He debuted as such with that name in Spider-Man number 51 in 1994. That's because it's adjectiveless Spider-Man. It's rare for Spider-Man comics to not have an adjective. However, the concept of Peter having clones, specifically Ben, had been around since the 70s, but that had been intended to be a one-shot and then a ballooned. This Ben heralds back to smack dab in the middle of the Clone Saga, a saga that has a lot of history and is now an infamous case of editorial pushing a story to go on too far. Ben Reilly would prove popular, even if the bait and switch initially pulled of him being the real Spider-Man and Peter Parker was not. In fact, after his death, there was fan backlash to bring him back. Ben Reilly is the first successful Peter Parker clone created by Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, and one of the most stable and well, nice. Not homicidal like some of those other clones out there who made this list as well. The name Ben Reilly comes from both Uncle Ben and Aunt May. The Ben from Uncle Ben, and the May from May's maiden name. Fans of Ben admired his attempts to build his own life and fight through the existential crisis that comes with being a clone. Who am I? What's the purpose of my existence? Plus, he had a vest. Never underestimate the appeal of a vest. Number 6, Superior Spider-Man. A controversial pick for some, as there were some fans who absolutely loathed this arc. And it is a rather different kind of alternate because all this is happening in the main verse in the body of main verse Peter. But let me explain. The mind is that of Dr. Octopus, who tricked Peter Parker to coming to him and then swapped with him while he was dying so that Peter's mind was trapped in his dying corpse body. For some reason, some fans were worried that this was gonna be permanent, which, I don't know, I mean, is anything? Life. It obviously ended up not being, and there was a kernel of Peter's consciousness that was left and then ended up unfurling and took back over eventually. However, some were fans of the villainous Doc Ock trying to be a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man himself. From the army of spider robots patrolling the city, to a sassy Spider-Man who a disturbing amount of his comrades couldn't identify wasn't the real Peter. For some fans, the Superior Spider-Man as an arc has earned its place as a favorite. Superior Spider-Man is still around, but it's not the same. Number 5, Spider-Side. Midway through, yet another clone. The clone saga would have been pretty disappointing if it hadn't given us what its name implied. Clones. Many clones. When Spider-Side emerged from the Jackal's pod, he was convinced that he was Peter Parker. When he was confronted with all these other versions who were already out, he decided that he was going to prove that he was the one and only by being as homicidal as possible. He became obsessed with proving that he was the real Peter Parker. He was unstable and violent and had been designed to kill the original Peter Parker. His name comes from the fact that it said that he was willing to commit Spider-Side, so mass homicide of Spider-Mans. Now some of you may be wondering, why Spider-Side and not Cain with his hand that he put on people's faces and do the mark of Cain thing? There was something classically menacing about Spider-Side, from his simplicity to his size. And such a back-to-basics baddie worked for some fans, and made him a rather cool addition to all these clones running around out there. Number 4, Spider-Man Noir. If there's one thing Marvel loves, it's an alternate universe story where the characters exist in another time period or genre, and Spider-Man Noir gives you both. Spider-Man Noir came into the world in 2009, and it gave the world a Peter Parker who was from 1933 and also from a Pulp Fiction style universe. A Peter Parker bitten by an illegally imported venomous spider. Now, Spider-Man Noir was not the only noir story to be created by Marvel, but it was one of the ones that blended the concepts together the best. They just kind of worked well together. The Into the Spider-Verse animated film also increased interest and fondness for this character, particularly his perplexedness over Rubik's Cubes, monochromatism. The Spider-Man Noir comic would get a spin-off and then the character would become part of the Spider-Verse event, but I mean, who wasn't? Number 3, Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman, aka Ghost Spider, aka we just need to accept that everybody's gonna call her Spider-Gwen. She was conceived of for the Spider-Verse event by Dan Slott, who had been writing Spider-Man for quite some time at that point and become obsessed with the idea of Gwen Stacy as Spider-Man. So the idea was born and would take off and would actually owe a lot of its success to her costume. Again, these things matter, people. The costume blew up and became one of the most cosplayed on the con circuit. This would actually cause a series of variant covers starring Gwen to be launched, one of which would be with Deadpool, which would actually launch the origin of Gwenpool. So we've got 2 characters out of 1. Gwen had an endearingly familiar story and design that resonated with people. She too got a boost from that Spider-Verse movie. That was just a solid movie. Most people came out of that liking most of the characters who were presented in it. Peter B. Parker. Number 2, Miles Morales. A character who predates the Spider-Verse by a couple of years. He debuted in Ultimate Fallout number 4 in 2011, and is one of the more fondly remembered elements of the 1610 universe, or the Ultimate Universe. He is also an excellent example of transitioning a character, one handled with respect for the original and also for the new character. Miles took up the mantle of Spider-Man after Peter Parker in his universe was killed. He struggled for a bit to find his footing and his own identity, but once he did, he created a rich tapestry of his own. So much so that he was one of the few characters to be imported when the Ultimate Universe was, well, ultimately collapsed. We just imported what we wanted into the 616 main verse. It's a thing, it happens. Miles was a successful legacy character because in his universe that's what he was. Now what is he? Another Spider-Man running around, but it's fine, we have multiples of everybody running around. Yeah. And in at number 1, Spider-Man 2099. The future. It can be a hard concept to pull off and make cool and credible, but the steampunk-esque adventure that was Spider-Man 2099 pulled it off. Meet Miguel O'Hara, who worked at an evil, because of course they were, corporation called Alchemax. Miguel is a geneticist who is trying to recreate the powers of Spider-Man for the company. That is until he learned a little bit more about them and then he wanted out. Well, when they heard that, they got him addicted to an illegal drug that they were the only people who could legally distribute it. So if he didn't get it from them, he was getting it from the street, and that meant he had to be arrested, so he was trapped. Well, in order to try and get out of this, he realized he had left his genetic code inside of the machine, so he tried to revert to that earlier level of his DNA, but ended up turning himself into a Spider-Man in the process. Yes. Spider-Man 2099 was one of the more fully fleshed out of the 2099 pantheon, and certainly one of the better remembered. Plus, as always, I've said it so many times on this video, but it's still true, costume is iconic. Also has the original colors that the person who pitched the Venom suit wanted, so that's another fun fact.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Ghost Spider. Coming from Earth 11638, aka the perfect world. Okay. This Peter Parker has a much brighter beginning, meaning Uncle Ben never actually passed away and gave the whole great responsibility speech. Instead, he encourages Peter to become a stronger Spider-Man, which sounds good on paper. It sounds like the ideal world. But does he recommend protein shakes and proper exercise and nutrition? No. See, Uncle Ben pushes Peter to abduct Spider-Man from other worlds and then absorb their life force via this portal that Parker Technologies created. So he's a bit of a dick, this Uncle Ben. He's not really the nicest guy. Maybe he's fine. I don't know. This whole system seems a little bit whack. Now, eventually, Earth 616 Spider-Man shows up. They both hear about each other. It's interesting because Uncle Ben poisons our Peter, and then he wakes up confused, and they fight it out, and our Peter Parker comes out on top, luckily, with the perfect, amazing spider getting his soul sucked into that machine. Now, the perfect Spider-Man spirit was then trapped in the underworld like hell, and then from here, it only gets more strange. Well, rather, it gets more Banner. See, Banner was the current Sorcerer Supreme at this time, so he ended up freeing Peter in his astral form, but then Peter absorbed all those spirits of the damned while he was down there, so when he came back up, this perfect spider was now Ghost Spider. Number 9, Old Man Spider. Ezekiel Sims from Earth 4, aka Old Man Spider, took over the web-slinging spot after Peter Parker lost his life to Morlun. Now, Ezekiel first appeared in Edge of Spiderverse issue 5. He was actually recruited by Spider UK, who I'll talk about a little bit later, to go against Morlun and the Inheritors. Now, Ezekiel rescued Ben Reilly and Kane from the Inheritors, which is awesome, and then a bunch of other spider beings were then recruited, but Deimos tracked them down and snapped this Spider-Man's neck. He caught him off guard. Brutal. And in his last words, he revealed his true self and told Peter to protect Silk, aka the bride. All that matters. What a beautiful last sentence. We love impactful last words here at Top 10 Nerd. It's the best. And you know what else we like? We like when you like our videos. Literally, go and give this video a thumbs up and it will do wonders for our channel. We're trying our best, so, you know, all we ask is for a little click. Maybe subscribe, maybe like, maybe notifications if you're feeling good. I don't know. Let's get back to the list. Number 8, Spider UK. Here he is, Billy Braddock himself. I told you I'd talk about him. He began his life as Captain Britain, actually, before he was webbing people up. So he's actually rocking both teams. He's a busy guy. He's on the Captain Britain team and then the Spider Armies. He made his first appearance in Edge of Spiderverse issue 2 over on Earth 833. Now, this Spider-Man is one of my favorite versions. His arc is so fun. He can hop between dimensions whenever he chooses, and then after the defeat of the Inheritors, spoilers, he keeps an eye on Earth 3145, and then during the Spider-Geddon storyline, in issue 2, Spider UK dies in an explosion, and it's buried in England on Earth 803, the home of Lady Spider, who loved the idea of Spider UK being buried in the same cemetery as her parents, because she loved him like a brother, of course. Brother zoned, even after death. He's down there like, really? Okay. That's a good one. Number 7, Spider-Man. Literally, this gets a little gross. Now imagine if Spider-Man had more spider than man when he was bit. That's what happened to Patton Parnell when he first entered comics in Edge of Spider-Verse issue 4. See, Patton lived a pretty dark life. He lived with an abusive Uncle Ted. He would perform horrible experiments on animals, and he spied on his neighbor Sarah Jane. So it's not a healthy system that he's got going on here in any way, really. One day, Sarah Jane and Patton went to Alcorp Industries in hopes of freeing all these test animals, but that's when Patton saw this red radioactive spider. He was like, I want to touch it. And then he did, got bit, and then got kicked out. Now, overnight, he didn't get jacked. His vision didn't get better. He wasn't webbing up Dr. Peppers and lamps. When he got his abilities, he started eating everything. He ate a mouse, and then he ate a cat, and then when Uncle Ted walked in, he was like, what's up? Now, this version is, of course, extremely powerful, but he's also extremely dark. We love the balance. We love balance. Number 6, Spider Cyborg. Coming from Earth 2818, this version is a dark future Spider-Man. I mean, look at him, of course. There's some sort of future-ness going on here. He made his first debut in Superior Spider-Man issue 33. Now, it's Peter Parker if he got cybernetic additions. It's badass. That's basically all it is. His one eye can zoom in, go all tactical. The claws can certainly leave a mark. And one of the most remarkable features, his arm cannon, his sonic arm cannon, that's definitely a plus. Now, before Karn came to Earth 2818, our Superior Spider-Man warned him, and then when Kane finally did show up, Superior Spider-Man and some other webbed friends joined the battle. His left eye being a red lens is actually a nod to his appearance early on in the 90s in Spider-Man issue 21, titled Dealing Arms. Number 5, the Scarlet Spider. Ben Reilly first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 149 as a clone. He was part of the whole clone thing that went on for way too long. But it wasn't until Spider-Man issue 5 that he was introduced to readers as the Scarlet Spider. Now, the Jackal created the clone using Peter's DNA, and he was made to fight Peter, of course. He's like, hey, if you can't beat him, just clone him. Now, the two were fighting it out in order to save Ned from a bomb. And then when the clone seemingly died, he was soon buried after. But the thing is, the Jackal injected him with something earlier so he could survive something like this. Of course. So for the next 5 years, he thought of himself as the useless clone that came back to life, then gave himself the name Ben Reilly. So depressed. Perhaps one of the better elements to come from the Clone Saga was Ben Reilly. One of the few things. Number 4, Spider-Man 2099. Ah yes, the not so near future. 2099 Spider-Man, aka Miguel O'Hara, is the current web slinger over there, and his outfit is one of the more memorable ones. His DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA, so it's a little bit different than our spider bite scenario that we have. Now he worked at Alchemex and was pressured by the company to test genetic coding, and after Mr. Sims didn't make one of those test runs, just went horrible, Miguel was then poisoned by Tyler Stone with a fatal drug named Rapture, so Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he couldn't quit his job. How brutal is that? It's like every McDonald's employee. It's like, hey, you want free nuggets? Sign in tomorrow. You're not going anywhere. So Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he tried to genetically fix himself and fix his body. Now, of course, this had a brighter turnout than expected, but Miguel inherited Spider-Man abilities plus telepathy. Must be nice. Number 3, the Spider. Earth 15 Spider-Man, simply referred to as the Spider, comes into comics during the Exile storyline issue 12. Now he was another Cletus Cassidy pretty much. I mean, he was a red-haired psycho who had no problem taking out innocent people, so when the Spider symbiote came along on this Earth, it merged with evil Peter, who was sentenced to not 1, not 2, but 67 life sentences from a jury. Okay, so he's bad. He was a big part of the Weapon X team, and he had Deadpool's sense of humor too, which made him just that much more evil. Now in Exiles issue 44, he was finally stopped by Firestar when she hit him with a mega blast. He was later buried in the prison cemetery, so even after death, you're still doing that time. Number 2, Miles Morales. Of course we gotta talk about him. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4 just a couple months right before the death of Peter Parker. Now this is a crazy time because Norman Osborn was just arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and while Miles was visiting his Uncle Aaron, an enhanced spider crawled out of Aaron's bag, bit Miles, and Bob's your uncle. You know the rest. Now he got these amazing Spider-Man abilities, but he could also camouflage himself almost fully invisible. Plus Venom blasts will help get the job done, that's for sure. The new PlayStation Spider-Man game is way more fun with these added abilities. Makes it way better, so I had to put him on this list and talk about them. Especially if we're talking about abilities. Hold L1 and just punch someone's chest through the wall, you're like, yeah, this is great. And finally, number 1, Cosmic Spider-Man, aka Captain Universe. This Spider-Man is one of, if not the most powerful alternate version of the web slinger. Cosmic Spider-Man went toe-to-toe with Rune King Thor and came out on top. So if you're not sold now, just get out of here. Actually, don't get out of here. Watch the rest of this video. Don't even say that. Never mind. Cosmic Spider-Man is from Earth 13. He retains the powers of the Enigma Force, and he first appears in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, Issue 9. Cosmic Spider-Man can't leave his universe or else he would lose the Enigma Force. That's why the resistance of spider heroes were based in Central Park of Earth 13. They're like, hey, no sweat, we'll come to you, no problem. We don't mind the commute. He meets his demise only a couple issues later, sadly, when the Inheritors were hunting down Spider-Man and their leader Solus drained the Enigma Force from him. But we can find more of him in What If Volume 2, Issue 31, titled What If Spider-Man Had Kept His Cosmic Powers, which I may or may not touch on in my next video. We'll see, stay tuned, it's a good one.
And it's then Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter. Yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body and didn't die in Otto's body, which ended up convincing Otto to be a hero, albeit a darker one. This small bit of Peter that was left in his body was also trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because a superhero was piloting his bone mech. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Peter from Otto's brain, but to get the actual item, Otto had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto was actually able to do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, but he also didn't want him to get the thing that would wipe him from his brain. Also, Otto did this surgery while having his Spider-Man mask on and an additional face mask. But either way, this version of Spider-Man was definitely more ruthless and willing to kill, since he was still technically a supervillain. And at 9, Kane. The clone that would come to be known as Kane was the Jackal's first attempt at cloning Peter Parker. Initially thought to be a success, Kane eventually became deformed due to a flaw in the cloning process, and he continued to degenerate, and he was left further deformed and mentally unstable. Aren't we all? The Jackal allowed Kane to live as like a test subject to see how long he would be able to survive, and it ended up exceeding Jackal's expectations. As a result though, Kane experienced a strong feeling of rejection that might be kind of like a father-son kind of thing, you know what I mean. Kane left and realized that the degeneration that had caused his mental state to decline had also amplified his powers that he had genetically kind of inherited from Peter. His strength, speed, stamina, and agility were also comparable to those of Peter, but he also gained precognitive powers as well, which showed him flashes of the future, which seemed to be sort of an amplified spider sense. He also possessed a mark of Cain, which was a corrosive touch that he used to leave eaten away handprints on victims' faces, which is pretty damn scary if you ask me. Also, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, be sure you hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps us out against the algorithm almighty. Also, I'm dressed as Spider-Man and talking about Spider-Man, so I feel like that's worth a like. And it ain't Pestilence Spider-Man. When Apocalypse started his plans for world domination, he captured 4 people who he saw as being good enough to be his horsemen and corrupted them. Spider-Man became the horseman known as Pestilence. Pestilence was one of the horsemen that Deadpool, Cannonball, and Siren encountered in their alternate reality search for Cable. And even though Pestilence was accompanied in the fight by Famine and Archangel, all 3 of them were defeated. This version of Peter Parker has the same powers as his 616 counterpart, except this time they've been augmented by Apocalypse when he corrupted them. But I mean, like a Spider-Man who is literally a horseman of the apocalypse and asks people if they will scream while he sucks the marrow from their bones, I think it's safe to say that this guy's pretty damn scary. And he made his first appearance in 2005, which makes this character around the same age that Peter was when he got his powers, which is kind of ironic. He hails from Earth 5701, which is the age of Apocalypse Earth. And it's 7 Ghost Spider. Ghost Spider comes from Earth 11638, and in this reality, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben never died, and actually ended up helping Peter to train as a hero with his new spider powers, becoming the Amazing Spider, a famous and popular superhero who also became a rich and successful scientist, having his own company called Parker Technologies. With his resources and motivation from Uncle Ben, the Amazing Spider used transportation technology to bring Spider-Men from other universes to his and absorb their powers to increase his. After bringing the Spider-Man from Earth 616 to his Earth though, and making him believe that he arrived in this universe by accident, the Amazing Spider was weakened by the feedback of the dimensional portal. Eventually, the Amazing Spider was convinced that what he was doing was not in fact heroic and allowed himself to die. But after dying, the Sorcerer Supreme of Dr. Banner, infused Peter's spirit that was trapped in hell with the powers of the damned, causing him to become a form of Ghost Rider, calling himself the Ghost Spider. And honestly, this is one of the baddest spider suits of all time. I love it. If I could figure out a way to cosplay this, I would. And it's 6 Zombie Spider-Man. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway, because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead was actually what caused this plague. But after learning that the plague was really bad, since I guess the fact that they were calling it a plague wasn't enough, or the fact that the world had to shut down, so the population wasn't wiped out, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and Mary Jane the hell out of Dodge. But when he got there, we got a good old case of Parker Luck, protagonist syndrome. Boom, zombie spider. He ends up becoming a zombie as soon as he gets home and eats the 2 most important women in his life. He also fractured his jaw before becoming a zombie so he could open his mouth more, I guess. Or kind of like man spider it. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. Like, even by zombie standards, it's whew. Halfway through into number 5, Man Spider. Man Spider is the mutated form of Spider-Man which appeared in both the comics and the 1990s animated series, with his original appearance actually coming from the animated series. In the 90s cartoon, Spider-Man's transformation into the Man Spider was not caused deliberately like it was in the comics, but as a result of his body mutating further from the original spider bite that gave him his powers. After his attempts to ask Professor X and the X-Men for help developing a cure meet with failure, Spider-Man turned to his friend Dr. Mariah Crawford for aid. Unfortunately, his initial attempt to cure himself resulted in him accelerating the actual mutation process and growing 4 new arms. The accelerated mutation subsequently caused him to mutate into the Man Spider after fighting the Punisher and a recently mutated Michael Morbius. The mutated Spider-Man retained some of his memories and his emotional responses to seeing loved ones or people who reminded him of his loved ones but could not communicate with them. Eventually, during the final episode of the storyline called Neurogenic Nightmare, Dr. Connors reprogrammed devices that Vulture was using mutation to absorb youth from other people, and caused him to give Peter back his spider powers but not the mutation, resulting in the Vulture mutating into Man-Spider, although somehow he had gotten rid of this mutation off screen later in the series. It's also worth noting that the introduction of Man-Spider in the comics, which was thanks to this animated series, is actually what introduced the biological web shooters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man into the comics as well. And at 4, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. Also being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s like the Man-Spider from last number, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with his superhero counterpart. However, the difference between these two was that Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. Thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Ohm, a version of a Carnage symbiote from another universe sensed this Peter's anger and latched onto him, turning him into the Spider Carnage, a version of Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, if you couldn't tell. A villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Spider Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and it's part of the reason I love the 90s cartoon so much. I watch it all the way through just so I can see Spider Carnage at the end. And while there is a version from the comics just called the Spider, which is Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, this version wanted to destroy literally everything, so yes please, this is certainly the scarier of the two, just saying. Sorry comic lovers, okay? Look, I like the comics too, but Spider Carnage is definitely worse than the Spider. Getting close to the end at number 3, Patient Zero Spider-Man. After the Punisher accidentally released Survivor 118, a chemical designed to help people adapt to a post-apocalyptic environment, Spider-Man was the first to show symptoms from it after he ate the rhino during a hockey game. The Fantastic Four subdued him shortly afterwards and put him in a cage for experimentation, but Ben Grimm also succumbed to the plague himself and freed Spider-Man from captivity, though the exact reason why he did that is unknown. As he escapes into the city, he briefly fought Wolverine and the Punisher, but soon the world would start to fall apart, and heroes and villains alike would become cannibals, eventually leaving the Punisher as the only hero left to fight them. A turf war erupted among the emerging tribes of cannibals, due in part to the King of Death's manipulations in an attempt to thin the herd, but Spider-Man, now referred to as Patient Zero, was the most successful, and took control of all of Manhattan for his own tribe, while the others left to stake new lands. They had to conquer other places. Especially given the recent world issues though, I think that this is certainly something that I can say a good majority of people are afraid of. Although I bet that there are some survivors on this earth that say Survivor 118, that the Survivor 118 plague is fake. Calling it. Penultimately, in at number 2, Wolf Spider. At an unknown time in this universe, Wolf Spider gained spider-like powers, but unlike most other realities Peter Parker, he became a villain, remorselessly killing this universe's Miles Morales and everyone who stood for heroism and responsibility. Because, you know, we're bad guys, it's what we do. First appearing in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon in Season 4, Episode 16, this guy isn't even the villain of just one world. After finding a shard of the Siege Perilous, he traveled through dimensions to find the rest. One of these dimensions was Blood Spider's homeworld, where he allied himself with the Lizard King. After turning almost everyone into vampires, which is weird because I mean it was called the Lizard King, well, wouldn't you want to turn them into lizards, but whatever. He and the Lizard King hatched a plan to block out the sun so that vampires could just roam free on the earth. And this sounds very Dawnguard Volkihar clan to me. Okay, Peter? Like, you gonna tell me that you need to find Oriel's bow next? And like a daughter of Cold Harbor? I don't know. Skyrim. Wolf Spider, though, was cold and ruthless and obsessed with gathering the shards of Siege Perilous, and seemed to have a grudge against Spider-Man and every Miles Morales. An evil Peter Parker is always a scary thing. And finally, in at number 1, Spider-Man. Peter Parker of Earth 11580 was once a promising young student, invited by Max Modal alongside his best friend Gwen Stacy to tour his Bleeding Edge company at Horizon Labs. One of the experiments the pair observed was a massive colony of spiders that Modell was bombarding with numerous radioactive particles in the name of genetic alteration. Parker, of course, fell into this colony where he seemed to be devoured, but in the process, the spiders became a singular hive mind construct that absorbed Peter's consciousness. So they started masquerading as the man they absorbed. The Hive, calling themselves Spidersman, put on the Spider-Man costume and began to fight crime in cruel York. First appearing in Spider-Geddon number 3, I absolutely hate the idea of a whole human being made of spiders, because that's just f***ed up. Look, I'm arachnophobic except for the odd time where I need to impress someone, but it's absolutely horrific to think of any being made entirely of spiders, okay? I would actually rather die. Even if this is a good guy. No fucking way am I looking at this man and saying, oh yeah, let's let him help us. No, he can go burn with the rest of the spider species as they fucking should, okay?
Number 10,
Lady Spider. Lady Spider is an alternate version of Spider-Man who hails from the Earth of 803. She was first introduced in Spiderverse issue number 1 from 2014. Earth 803 is similar to our own history's turn of the century or Victorian period. Here, May Riley, aka Lady Spider, was the daughter of an accomplished inventor with a passion for various animals and insects. After her father's death, May decided to become a hero and created for herself a mechanical suit and web shooters, taking up the mantle of Lady Spider. She does not have any powers but is considered to be a spider totem and is able to fight against villains on her Earth using her suit and her equipment. I also just love her overall look, it's so cool. Number 9. Spider Bite. Spider Bite comes to us from A Vault of Spiders issue number 1 from 2018. Her real name is Margot and she takes up the hero persona of Spider Bite in secret while immersed in cyberspace, a virtual reality world that humans, I assume in the future, frequent on a regular basis. It's like the internet, but if you could walk around in it and actually, like tap into it, experiencing it with a virtual avatar that is meant to represent you as opposed to just surfing it on your computer. It kind of reminds me of that episode of Adventure Time where they find that island full of people who are basically fed through tubes and plugged into a virtual reality Matrix-like world where they live out their day-to-day through virtual avatars that they can customize. I don't know if you've seen that episode, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty trippy. We haven't seen much of Spider Bite yet in the comics, with her only appearing in 2 issues, but I really do hope we get to see more of her and her alternate futuristic world of Earth 22191. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list as much as I am loving giving it to you, please be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up. We also have a really awesome Spider-Man playlist, so if you have a hankering for Spider-Mans or Spider-Ladies, be sure to check that out. Spider folks, Spider totems. Number 8. Spider-Girl. Anya Corazon got her powers through a spider tattoo after she was considered a powerful potential candidate for the Spider Society by one of their sorcerers, Miguel. The Spider Society is a secret society that has existed since 1099 AD. They worship and often seek to protect spider totems, those who are fated to become superpowered spider-like beings. That's what a spider totem is. Ezekiel Sims also belongs to the Spider Society, for example. Miguel believed that Anya had what it took to become one of their hunters, warriors who fought against the Sisterhood of the Wasp. Anya ended up getting caught in the midst of a fight looking to protect a stranger who happened to be the sorcerer Miguel. To save her life and seeing her potential, he transferred some of his power to her, giving her that spider tattoo as well as spider-like powers along with it. Number 7. SP//DR, or as I like to say, Spider. Spider, aka Penny Parker. You might recognize Penny from the first Into the Spider-Verse film. She was introduced there as a young girl who inherited her father's spider-like mech suit, SP//DR, Spider, after he died. As the suit was made based on her father's genetics, it was believed that Penny was the only one to carry on his work with the mech. She allowed the radioactive spider connected to the suit's CPU to bite her so that she could bond with and control the suit alongside it. Penny was created by Gerard Way and Jake Wyatt and made her first appearance in 2014 in Edge of the Spider-Verse issue number 5, before showing up in the film 4 years later in 2018. Number 6. Spider-Man. Spider-Man has to be one of my favorite all-time alternate characters in the history of Marvel. I just love that she became a full-fledged hero in her own right, and that she helped to defeat the Inheritors the second time around while also deciding to raise all of the then-made baby versions of them. If anyone could make sure they grow up to be good and kind instead of murderous spider totem devouring villains, it's Aunt May. Spider-Man hails from Earth 3123 and comes from What If issue number 23 originally, where we ask the question what would happen if Aunt May had been bitten by a radioactive spider in the place of her nephew Peter Parker. And to be clear, that is What If issue 23 from the 1977 series. Not 89, if you're looking for it. Number 5. Venom. Not that Venom from Earth 616, this Venom from Earth X, aka Earth 9997. This version of Venom and alternate spider person is May Parker, the daughter of Mary Jane Watson Parker and Peter Parker. There is much we do not know about May's origins, but we do know that in her youth she was trained likely by the hero Daredevil, aka her uncle Matt, in the use of her spider sense in combat. Her relationship with her father was made more complicated when Venom left its aged host, Eddie Brock, and sought out May to try and use her as a weapon of revenge against Peter Parker, still holding a grudge against Spider-Man for rejecting the symbiote years ago. Venom was like, I remember all these grudges, I don't let them go. Fortunately, May's willpower was so strong that she was able to bend the symbiote to her will, allowing her to take control of it and use it for her own heroic means, instead of it corrupting her. Number 4. Madam Web. Julia Carpenter has been known by a few different spider-centric names over the years when it comes to her heroics. Initially we knew her as Spider-Woman, but she would later take up the mantle of Arachne before becoming Madam Web, and receiving the precognitive and telepathic abilities of Cassandra Webb as she passed away. Julia Carpenter originally got her spider-like abilities when she was unknowingly experimented on. She had volunteered to be part of what she thought was a medical athletic-based study. However, in reality, the government was really experimenting on her to try and create their own superhero. Julia Carpenter also has a daughter named Rachel, though we haven't really seen her for a while in the comics. I hope she's doing okay. Number 3. Spider-Woman. Thank goodness not everyone on this list is known as Spider-Woman, because that would make it really confusing. Though this hero is someone that you would probably still associate with the name Spider-Girl, as it was a mantle she had for many years in the comics. However, May Parker, the daughter of Mary Jane Watson Parker and Peter Parker from Earth 982, is all grown up now, hence her taking on the mantle of Spider-Woman instead. May, nicknamed Mayday Parker, is the first child of MJ and Peter, but also has a clone, named April Parker, who joined the family as a stand-in cousin, and May also has a younger brother known as Ben. I always wondered if Peter just comes up with all the names for their kids, or what's going on there. I have to assume though that MJ must just really be on board with naming her kids after Peter's aunt and uncle, as in almost all alternate realities, that's what ends up happening. I don't even know, does MJ just not want to name people after her family? I guess her family history is pretty weird and dramatic, so maybe that's why. She has mixed feelings about her family members. Number 2. Ghost Spider. While Gwen Stacy might be dead and gone in the reality of Earth 616, on the reality of Earth 65, she was the one who received spider-like abilities, while her good friend Peter Parker was the one to die, becoming the reluctant villain known as the Lizard before being killed. Peter had looked up to Spider-Woman as she was originally known when she first came on the scene. He wanted to be a hero like her, but instead ended up as a monstrous creature, oh no, becoming the Lizard after experimenting on himself. Gwen of Earth 65 has been known as Spider-Woman, Venom, Spider-Gwen, and more recently took up the mantle of Ghost Spider in the comics. Number 1. Spider-Woman. One of my all-time favorite spider heroes. And also yes, the second Spider-Woman on this list, but hey, a lot of people go under the mantle Spider-Woman, as I said. Jessica Drew has a super weird and kind of complicated story when it comes to her origins, especially as time has gone on and we've learned more about it. But I don't know if we consider it weirder than her original origins, which was that she was a woman who used to be a spider. That's a pretty weird story. I am gonna say it's almost at that level though, with there being secret plots seemingly behind all of what went on with her birth and her childhood, and her being experimented on as a child. However, when her origins was shifted initially to her being a sick child who was saved with a serum based off of spider DNA, it was a lot less twisty and bizarre. It's actually almost kinda nice. Ugh, I don't know though, it's pretty weird, still pretty weird. All of her origins are weird. Especially as she did still spend pretty much all of her childhood inside a stasis tube, in essence skipping all of those developmental stages and then emerging as a fully grown, naive, and superpowered adult later on in her life. Fully cured, but now having spider-like powers. Basically like a child who just fast forwarded to an adult, but then you didn't actually get to experience a childhood, so what would that be like? I feel like you'd be kinda messed up from that. Jessica has been a member of the Avengers, a pal of Wolverine's, and has fought alongside her fellow spider alternates from the Spiderverse. All around, she's just a cool lady. And now it is time for an honorable mention! Someone who wasn't on this list, but in a weird way is also a female Spider-Man alternate, is everyone's favorite actress, redhead, and Spider-Man confidant, Mary Jane Watson. Mary Jane is not a permanent spider hero in the reality of Earth 616, but she has fought by Peter's side before in his Iron Spider suit, and on the Earth of 18119 as the spider-themed hero, Spinneret. There she fights alongside her family full-time pretty much, including her husband Peter Parker aka Spider-Man and their daughter Annie Parker aka Spider-Ling. I'm a sucker for a good family of heroes.